So if we look here, I happen to know the pixel width of these. So this is 360, and if you did the math, you could figure out what the rest of it is. I know this is about 110 or so, so 360 and 110. So column left, width is 360, and the width is 110. There should be some wiggle room left, so that's cool, no problem. There'll be some padding, etc. that'll push those together. So those numbers should work out. If not, you just, well, I forgot the PX on both of those. Okay, there's the shift. So that's the gist of it. Kind of complicated in its process, but the more you do it, the easier it becomes. Essentially, right after the containing div, or the containing tag, I should say, will collapse on its floating children, and so you need a little fix. You need something with a property that will ignore those, and in turn stretch those two out. And that's how it's done. All right, finish it out. There's quite a bit of stuff to figure out. Have fun. Hello, today we're going to talk about floating. That's how you get tags to go side by side. In the next version of HTML, CSS, this is going to be a lot easier, I think, but until Internet Explorer becomes savvy, we're going to have to do things this way. The floating concept will be the same, but there's a couple hacks that you have to use to make it work. So let's get started. First thing I want to do is take a look at that. So if you look at this website, I've got a list of photos. Since we're being standards compliant, this is indeed a list, so it should be tagged or marked up in an unordered list. So in standards world, a list is a list, and that is indeed a list of photographs. Just because they're images and not text doesn't mean that it's not a list. And it creates little boxes and a parent-child relationship that makes it handy to work with anyway. So it's good that it is that way. So let's first tackle this list. So looking at the markup, got our content area with our photos. Here's that paragraph. Here's the unordered list, and here are the IMG tags with the paths to those photographs. Notice that in my structure, they're in a folder called images, and so I have to provide that path from this file, photos. So here I am, and so if I lived in this room and I was looking for, say, small image 1, I would first target the image folder, then I say slash, it means I'm in the images, go in there and find this, which lives in that folder. So images slash SM01, and there it is. Okay, so a little path explanation. So we'll save that. Now let's tackle that list. We don't want to affect any other list. For instance, this nav. So we want to tackle or contextualize, say, this list. So why don't we go ahead and divide that with a div tag. When you get super tricky, you can just use the UL for this, but I didn't want to do too much too fast. And then, so we're just marking this area saying this area is a photo gallery. ID equals photo gallery. So I'm just identifying this div as ID photo gallery with that there. So let's go down here in the CSS, and we need a number sign saying that that is an ID attribute and not a tag. So don't forget that semantic. Let's scoot this up so we can put it higher. Alright, so photo gallery. Not going to do anything to that just yet. What we want to do is affect the UL inside that photo gallery. So we're saying the UL tag that lives inside anything with the ID attribute photo gallery. And UL does live inside that photo gallery. And we'll just take off the margin and the padding. And we'll say list style to none. Take those dots off. Save. Back to there. We'll refresh, and that should be clean and dandy. So that's pretty simple. So now to the getting these things side by side. If we look, we want these in a little, if you look at the finished example, you'll see that they're in this little side-by-side deal where they're in a quad of 4. And if there were 100 there, they would just kind of all be in a neat and little tidy side-by-side grid. You do this by using the float property, and essentially the float property just says don't stack on top of each other. And it's really saying any tag underneath me, wrap around until you say you hit the edge of your parent or something like that. Just wrap around me. They don't float above, so any of these tags, they don't go side by side. But any of these, it'll just go side by side until it runs out of room, and it'll go to the next line. So that's easier explained by seeing it. So let's go ahead and see it. Alright, so we'll say photo gallery. Let's do a little copy and paste here. And then we'll target the LI tag because we want those little LI tags. Just picture them as little boxes around each image. And we can just say, hey, float side by side. We go over here and we say float left. There is also a float right. FYI. Alright, so now they're floating. So now they're side by side. You can see the main problem and where the hack comes in at this moment. Notice that the containing divs, the parent divs, collapsed. The problem is that parent divs don't, by default, stretch around children that are floating. It's kind of kooky. I wish it wasn't that case, but indeed this is the case until it gets fixed. So we're going to have to figure out how to fix that. Students will often forget this fix, so pay attention to this part because you'll use it over and over again. It's a little hacky, but that's how it's been done until we get cleverer. So let's move on to that. Alright, how we do this is we have to affect the markup. And that's not always the best thing to do because markup should be only for content, not to fix visual problems. But in this instance, it's the only way to do it from what we know. So what I'm going to put in here is a common tag called BR, and it's one that closes itself. Essentially a BR tag. Let's go ahead and put one in this paragraph. It just makes that paragraph here go down a line like if I press Shift Return in InDesign. So you can see that put that on one list down or one line down. So that's just a carriage return tag. Not a big fan of that tag, so I wouldn't use that for layout reasons, but for this reason we'll use it. So essentially, since these LI tags are floating, the UL tag no longer wraps around that, and then in turn the photo gallery tag no longer wraps until it hits something that's not floating, which would be this paragraph up here. So we're going to put a BR tag around the thing that we want to stretch out, which is this photo gallery div. We want that thing to stretch out, and then in turn that will stretch out the content, fix everything. So we always have to be just above the thing we want to uncollapse. I'm going to put a class here. So we talked about IDs last time. Classes are the same concept, except that ID should only be used once per page, and they should be used broad for broad sections. Classes are for very specific elements, and they're generally more generic. They're less structural, and they can be used over and over again on a page. So you can use a class 1,000 times on one page. IDs you should only use once per page. So let's go ahead and create a class called clearFix. That is a common class name for that. Save that and go back here, and let's make the definition for a class. A class, instead of a number sign for ID, you use a period. No space before that. Just period clearFix. And now we're going to use a property to ignore this float. And that property is called clear. Hence the clearFix title. And there's a float left, a float right, and if you want to ignore them, most often you just want to ignore any float, so you say both, meaning ignore the left, ignore the right. But you can ignore just the left or ignore just the right. But we'll say clear both. Let's go and see if this works. So click refresh, and now that's no longer collapsing, so that's going to act normal. Just to refresh, I've got a tag that's holding only floating elements, all of these elements, so these were floating and are, and essentially this parent div collapses because floating elements don't stretch out the parents like normal parent-child relationship would. So we have to put a little hack in here just above the closer of that photo gallery div, and we use a generic BR tag and we say clearFix, and that stretches that out. Very common use of that. Alright, so on to the next.